Welcome back to the Critically Zionist Podcast, a podcast for critical Zionists who see Zionism as critical. This week, we're going to be answering some questions and comments that you listeners have sent in from our last episode. I'm your host, Shuki Hartuv, an Israeli tour guide for Hartuv Tours. And with me, as always, is Noam Zuckerman, the most well-read young Zionist around. So Susan from Tel Aviv writes, if I'm honest, there was quite a bit that I disagreed with. For instance, you described the bad blood between Rabin and Peres, and then somewhere along the way, you said they found their way to a better cooperative relationship. That's not how I see it. What I remember is they were disdainful and antagonistic to the end, and that the lack of trust between the two men ended up having a lot of influence on how Oslo went forward. I'm also not so sure I agree with your analysis that the murder of Rabin killed Oslo and the peace process. But I hope that disagreeing with your podcast is one of the things you're looking for.
Disagreeing is exactly what we're looking for. We're trying to create a conversation here about Zionism, and a conversation where we don't set borders, we don't set limits. We try and open it to people of different perspectives. And I'm so happy to hear people challenging us, especially someone who lived in Israel during the time that we were talking about in the last episode and brings a very different perspective than what I have. I was 5 years old when Rabin was assassinated, living in Chicago. I don't even know if I knew what Israel was. And I've done a lot to learn about that period, but I think that there's always going to be a level of separation from what you learn through secondhand sources as opposed to what actually happened. I see a different Israel when I'm looking at Rabin, an Israel that was willing to take risks for peace, an Israel that was going for kind of like a hopeful future. And I see all these amazing initiatives that came out of their partnership. And I think that that's what we talked about in the episode.
You can look at one, as we were discussing before, where you can look at one as the doer, one as the orator, and that it seems like it's a perfect partnership. But ultimately, it's kind of like in basketball where you have like Durant and Westbrook, where both of them need the ball. And ultimately, even if they are friends or agree ideologically that they both want to win an NBA championship, it doesn't always work necessarily that way if you have two people who are kind of equally good on the same team, which is one way to look at it. But the other way to look at it, just relating it back to Rabin and Peres, is they're buried next to each other on Har Herzl. In a way, the final moment that they have together is they make up a little bit before this great peace rally in Tel Aviv. They needed to be Pippen and Jordan and not Durant and Westbrook, is what you're saying.
And Shuki, did we let Rabin off the hook for the way that he responded to the Palestinians in the first Intifada with his policy of break their bones?
We also let him off the hook for, in 1948, with how he commanded the Israeli troops in Ramleh to, I guess it was 1949, Israeli troops in Ramleh to essentially like clear out the Arabs in Ramleh. And I don't know if we let him off the hook. We didn't discuss it as thoroughly as we could have in a way, but yeah, I think he had these kinds of two, what we discussed in the podcast was that he had these two personalities, where one is this bone breaker that was very apparent, especially in 1948 and especially during the first Intifada. And he also had this idea of a peacemaker and a bridge builder.
And we got another really nice comment from our friend from Noam.
The truth is, a lot of it, like, it raised my eyebrow. I felt that when you said sort of the right part of Israel during Oslo just like wouldn't give hope a chance kind of thing. And I think it's like important there to emphasize the context of like while Oslo Accords were going on, there were like people being killed in terrorist attacks every day. There was a reasonable opposition to Oslo, like the inciting of violence against Rabin wasn't reasonable. There was a rational argument to be made against Oslo, even if you don't agree with it or even if you don't think it was right.
Did we do justice for the people who didn't support the Oslo Accords?
I think part of what our memory is kind of our defining experience growing up as Zionists in Chutz La'aretz, Zionists outside of Israel, is the second Intifada. And in a way, the second Intifada blinds us from how terrible the first Intifada was too. I think that the first Intifada was the first time that fear really came to a head in such a dramatic way, and Israelis didn't know what to do with it.
We talked a lot about in the episode how Rabin was making peace with an enemy of his, Yasser Arafat, for so long, and then in the Oslo Accords, he had to shake his hand. But what we have to understand when we're talking about Israeli society is that Israelis were fighting Yasser Arafat. And he was public enemy number one. You know, there were so many soldiers that went to war that suffered so many different types of casualties. And a big portion of Israeli society, from the right wing all the way to the center, and probably many people on the left, saw Arafat as their enemy. And we need to remember that even though there was an opportunity for peace, there was so much suspicion. Rabin had his suspicion, and so did everyone else who was on that side. And thank you, Susan. Thank you, Noam. We really appreciate the feedback. We're going to continue saying things that you're going to disagree with, but we're so happy that you call us out, that you help us learn more. We want to say something really quick about Noam. He definitely did not ask for this, but Noam just started a really, really cool company in Toronto called Get Out Toronto. They provide unique outdoor adventures and world-class travel experiences in Toronto's backyard. With long-distance travel grounded this year, it is a unique opportunity to safely discover the incredible adventures available close to home. Join Get Out Toronto and paddle, ride, hike, and climb your way through Ontario's most spectacular spots, always at your own pace with private professional outdoor guides. So you can go to getouttoronto.com for more information, and it's got our highest recommendations.
For sure. I've even canoed with Noam when we were kids, so I know how good he is at paddling. Please continue to send your comments and questions to criticallyzionistpodcast@gmail.com after every episode, and spread the word to your friends and family to have a listen.